The room hums before the first word is spoken. It's the kind of low, electrical hum that only happens when every screen is alive and every person is trying not to blink. The wall of monitors throws blue light over a line of producers, and the glass of the conference room reflects a dozen versions of the same tense faces. Someone has just said, "There's a sub," and then, "We've lost contact." The push alert pings again. It is as sterile as a pulse. Contact lost with tourist submersible en route to Titanic site. Someone whispers the line that will become tomorrow's first graphic oxygen countdown. A whiteboard squeaks as a number appears. 96 hours then is crossed out and replaced with 94. The chief leans forward and says, "That's a clock. That's narrative. That's live." Phones lift in a practiced synchrony. Calls ripple out. Bookers and desk editors and satellite truck wranglers moving like a tide. Coast Guard spokesperson. Expert in submersibles. Billionaire friend. Can we be live from St. John's? Can we build a lower third that pulses like a heartbeat? On the third screen from the left, muted, a different video flickers. A charcoal smudge of a boat, night vision green on black. A dark pentagon of sea with pinpricks of phones lighting bewildered faces. The Chiron, when someone unmutes it, reads in white and red. Boat carrying migrants capsizes off Greek coast. Many missing. The camera angles are distant and shaky. No clock, no pressure gauge, no brand name. Mara stands with a tablet pressed to her hip, thumb hovering over an audio message from a number she saved as Kalamata Porchi stranger. She hears the end first, the exhausted intake of breath after the sentence. She taps back to the beginning. A man's voice, clipped by a bad connection. They say hundreds. The Coast Guard was towing them. "I have footage. Are you coming?" An engine revs in the background. Someone shouts Ya Allah and a chain clatters like rain. Mara glances at the whiteboard. The countdown number is now an anchor point for every decision in the room. She thinks of how the story sells itself. An elite adventure gone wrong. The romance of the Titanic stitched to modern hubris. Sonar screens. A multinational search armada. The opportunity for live hits every hour as the clock winds down. She looks back to the muted video from Greece. A thin boy in a life vest, eyes wide, looks up at a helicopter's searchlight and raises his hand with the bewildered politeness of someone greeting a stranger. The shot cuts away. "We can get a chopper in Newfoundland within 4 hours, says the chief, and a live shot from Woods Hole. He looks at Mara. "What about the migrant thing? What's the scene?" "Night," Mara says, conflicting numbers. Port access, uncertain. Survivors mostly from Pakistan and Syria. Visuals limited. She hates that the last word is the one that seals it. The chief nods, already moving on. "Let's lead with the sub-pens tap. We'll monitor the other. If the numbers climb, we pivot. Let's go, people." In Greece, dawn edges into the harbor. A line of emergency blankets shivers in the early wind, a metallic field of dandelions gone to seed. A woman with a gray scarf pours water from a pan into a paper cup and places it in a trembling hand. The camera phone vertical struggles to find focus. A man in a wet shirt tells the policeman that his brother is below. His other brother is below. But the policeman is looking at a plastic clipboard and does not look up. A local radio host arrives, out of breath, clutching a mic that reads Kalamata FM. He asks softly, "What is your name?" The boy with the polite hand says it, twice, then spells it as if any of this will matter. At desks everywhere, fingers type the submersible story into the world. People search for the names of the 5 men on board. Someone finds a video of one of them extolling the sub's carbon fiber hull. Someone else finds a transcript where he jokes about operating with a game controller. A producer circles the phrase billionaire adventurer. A young graphics designer scrolls through an image bank for a stock photo of an oxygen gauge, something that might flicker as the hours fall away. They build a lower third named rescue window. Mara listens again to the audio from Kalamata Port. This time, when the man's voice says, "Are you coming?" she hears something else. The breath behind the question, the lifetime of calling for help and waiting. She thinks of thresholds of the old theory she memorized in grad school about newsworthiness, tolls, proximity, the unexpected. She thinks of the way the cameras are drawn to drama that arrives punctually, sirens wailing at reasonable hours, helicopters circling in daylight. She thinks of the disasters that do not cue so politely, that seep like a bruise across weeks, months, years. Her phone rings. "We need you on the sub," a coordinating producer says. "You've done deep sea before. You know the Coast Guard comes." Mara glances at the other monitor. The glint of emergency blankets and grease, a jackets and clipboards huddle of officials who are careful not to be seen looking aside. The audio from Kalamata crackles again. A second message sent 5 minutes later but received now, the network coughing it up when it wants. "They are saying the boat was left there for hours," the voice says. "They sent it to deeper water. The women and children were in the hold. Are you coming?" Outside, morning stretches thinly over the city. Mara says, "Patch me in with the Coast Guard," and fields a glance from across the room that reads as a thank you for being reasonable. She walks to the editing bay, passing the intern who is building a scrolling timeline lost at 9:45 a.m. Search launches at the edge of the whiteboard. Someone has drawn a small cartoon of a tiny sub and a giant clock. Underneath, Someone else has written in smaller letters, half joke, half prayer, find air. On the screen from Greece, a bag of cell phones is set on a table like a basket of fruit. The camera zooms onto hands that are rubbing each one. A policewoman opens a phone with a cracked screen and holds a fingerprint pad to fingers that are still wrinkled from the sea. A man next to her asks in faltering English, "How do you spell your name?" The boy repeats it, again. He will repeat it all day. Mara sits, her tablet vibrates on the table and dances in an unused napkin's lilt. A meteorologist on the substory is saying, below 13,000 feet the pressure is, he nods, a little too hard, to make the woman on the screen feel she is listening. She is also listening to the harbor, the metallic flutter, the breath, the clipped radio calls, the question that echoes in her anchor bone. By noon, the sub is everywhere, split-screen sonar pings, animated graphics showing it sinking toward the ghost of the Titanic. A translucent human silhouette inside a capsule with a red line licking down the side like Mercury retreating in winter. On a small window at the bottom left, sometimes, the Greek video plays and the words migrants, hundreds feared missing skim under the oxygen clock like a shadow beneath a boat. Mara signs the travel authorization for the Newfoundland crew. As her pen leaves the paper, the stringer's voice jolts in again. He says, "They are saying the Coast Guard pulled them. They are saying they shouted for hours. The hands, did you see the hands? Are you coming?" The question lifts a hook thrown across an ocean, landing in the useless decorum of a newsroom where the lights never change. She looks up, and across the room the chief calls. "We've got an expert who says the hull could still be intact." Someone else cheers for the oxygen clock. Now in the corner of the screen, ticking to the audience's breath, Mara mutters, "Patch me to Kalamata," to no one in particular, and picks up her phone as if it is a life ring. Fingers fumbling not with the smooth digital glass but with the roughness of an unspoken admission. She is writing an email. She deletes the first line 3 times. The cursor blinks like a small, impatient heartbeat. She writes, "We are coming." She stops. She doesn't yet have approval. She doesn't yet have a budget. She is making a promise with a pronoun she doesn't control. She presses send anyway, unaware of the gust gathering over another sea further east, where 2 old earth dams will spend the night groaning beneath a sky that does not believe in clocks. Somewhere beyond the monitors, a siren begins to fall through the air. She watches the oxygen clock count down as if it were a sunrise she can persuade to. Reverse 90, 89, 88. She watches the faces of experts, the tidy declensions of risk, the confident predictions that the hum of propellers will be heard soon, the splitting certainty that this is a story of rescue or a story of catastrophe and that both make good television. At the bottom of the screen the words rescue window narrows glow, a shade that designers choose for urgency. Coffee is poured as if it contains hope. The call from Greece keeps stuttering through the day. Not because the man calls often, but because the network grants his voice in choked portions. "They took them to deeper water," he repeats. "They made them wait. Then, the women and children." And the audio drops, replaced by a studio voice saying, "Imagine the cold at that depth." An hour later, the stringer sends a video of a long bundle of blankets moving down a corridor. 2 men with close-cropped hair are walking beside it, one with a hand on the sagging end as if to steady the shape inside. The camera pulls past faces that are trying to read something from these faces. A woman with a notebook asks, "How many?" The answer, over and over, is a shrug. Someone says 78, someone else says 600. Reality has not yet agreed with itself. "Get me a sense of the Coast Guard's narrative," the chief says. Mara calls the press office, where a weary voice repeats, "This is under investigation." Says search and rescue protocols. Says strong winds, poor sea conditions, are overwhelming priority. The words brush off her ear like rain. She hears in the grain of it something else. The ambition to be on the right side of the breathing public. She hears also the quiet that rises when the story is judged to be complicated, messy, a tangle of culpabilities that does not fit under a clock. By late afternoon, Mara has bought a flight to Athens to connect south to Kalamata. She is not on the Newfoundland manifest for the sub. She watched the crew roll the case with the live unit toward the elevator and said, "Be careful," as if equipment could feel. The intern with the oxygen graphic looked at her with relief, as if she had moved a chess piece off the board so he wouldn't have to. On the taxiway, the heat from the engines wobbles the horizon like a mirage. A pilot flips a switch and the jolt rattles through aluminum bones to the cup of water in Mara's hand. She sips, thinking of water as a character, as a villain, as a proposition. The boy's name is in her notes. She has written it 3 times to be sure she will say it correctly. She watches the plane lift and thinks of the story she will have to sell when she lands a story without a clock, without a billionaire, without a sonar ping. Her phone vibrates with an email subject line. Pakistan floods, death toll rises. The date is last summer. The algorithm has resurfaced the headline because of her search history. The old dread splits open again. 33 million affected. Homes taken not by a single wave but by weeks of water that arrived and then refused to leave. She remembers a farmer standing on a narrow strip of dry land, rice fields around him turned into a broad brown plain. He lifted his arms toward the camera, not in supplication but in demonstration. Here is where I planted. Here is where my father planted. Here is the line the water should respect. The camera bowed to his hands. The producing budget shrank and the crew pulled out after 3 days. The flood was not done. It just moved sideways, and then images were dulled by the second week. Water is water, a blank, we said while the scale grew monstrous. The plain banks. Clouds tugged the sun under the wing. The world goes grey. Her neighbor, a French businessman with a neat tie, asks her if she is traveling for work. She says yes. He says, the submarine, and makes the universal pinch of fingers around a small, imaginary object. She says, Greece, and he says, ah, and then looks at his phone. The notification on his screen is the same as the one on hers. Oxygen now at 68 hours. The small airport at Kalamata smells faintly of hot metal and sea salt and cigarette smoke that has taken up residence in tile grout. The stringer is smaller than his voice suggested, dark hair stuck to his forehead, his camera in a bag that looks like it lost both a war and its zippers. He shakes her hand, then shrugs as if a handshake were an inadequate way to begin. They are keeping the press at the line, he says. The men who survived, they are. He searches for a word that implies somewhere not here and settles on, inside. The police have set up a ribbon of tape like a stage's velvet rope in front of a concrete building with barred windows. The blankets, now limp, are stacked like laundry in the sun. A man in a navy uniform looks over the crowd and then beyond it, toward the water, where a boat is coming in slowly, carrying something long and white bodies. The stringer says, unnecessarily. He lifts his camera. Mara lifts hers. The shot wobbles and then steadies, and she finds herself breathing in time with the frame. A young man with red-rimmed eyes stands near the tape, not looking at the building, not looking at the water. He is looking at his hands, which are dry now. Mara asks him in English if he speaks English. He nods, then shakes his head, then nods. She lowers her voice. What is your name? He says it. She says it back. He smiles, a strangled thing, neither approving nor forgiving her mistake. He says, brother, and points at the building. Other brother, and points at the sea. The Greek reporter next to her says to no one in particular, they warned them to stay put. And then they moved them into international waters, in a tone that is not for airing yet. Not before quotes and statements and careful rebuttal. But the tone fits in Mara's notebook like a brick. She understands what it is to be compelled and also cautious. She understands how the most watchable television is a symphony of clear blame and strong lighting. The first piece runs at 6. In New York, they wedge it between segments on the sub and a commercial about pet insurance. The anchor says, in Greece, hundreds may have drowned off a boat carrying migrants, in that practiced way of emptying the may from both hope and numbers. The footage is dark but not mysterious. The suffering naked and also far away. They show the boy's hand raised toward the helicopter and the plastic bag of phones and a line of black body bags laid gently on a dock. They do not show any faces. The graphic says, tragedy at sea in a sober font. After the segment, the oxygen clock appears again, indifferent to everything else on the screen. A scrolling list of the 5 men's resumes passes under it. Navy diver, Titanic, expert, explorer, CEO, father and son. The music rises before the break. At the harbor, the men with close-cropped hair lift another body bag, and a woman in a headscarf in the crowd makes a small sound that contains all the need to be known and none of the expectation. Night returns, and with it a damp chill that creeps into clothes. The tape flutters and then drops when someone leans too hard against it. The crowd moves forward and stops, moves forward and stops, the way crowds do when there is an invisible line between allowed and forbidden. The stringer's phone lights up with messages in Arabic, Urdu, Greek. He translates, are you alive? Are you there? How do I find the boat? A man with a radio yells something about the morgue in Kalamata. The smell changes. Mara has learned to make her face into a fixed thing, respectful, absorbing, not a tourist of pain, not a thief. She fails regularly. Tonight, she is too tired to fail with flourish. She just stands and watches. Back in New York, the chief taps a map. We've got a window at 3 a.m. when the Coast Guard will brief, he says. Get us live, a producer asks. Do we stay on Greece? The chief calculates the numbers not of dead, but of viewers. He shrugs. Do a minute. In the harbor, a fog rises from the water that seems almost staged. The boy with the polite hand is sitting now, eyes closed, his head against the wall. His lips are moving. Mara stands close without intruding. She hears a word repeated. It could be a name, it could be a prayer. It could be the syllables of a place that meant home yesterday and is now a proposition for where to ship a body. Her phone vibrates with an alert from a meteorologist she follows. It reads, a medicane is forming over the Ionian, rare, but getting less rare, warm water. Watch Libya. Her eye slides to the horizon beyond the port, where the sea is flat and harmless. She swallows an irrational urge to warn it. A policeman announces in a tone that pretends order. No more tonight. Come back in the morning. A chorus of protests rises and dissolves. The lights bleach everything hollow. The blanket piles gleam. Mara says to the stringer, we'll film at first light. He nods. He lifts his bag and heaves it over his shoulder the way you lift a thing that you know will be heavy forever. Do you think they will care? He asks. And he does not mean the viewers. He means the people who can decide the next story we tell, the next sliver of the world we call urgent. Mara does not lie. She says, I will try. And then, like someone making a deal with a god that does not barter, we will try. A breeze pushes the fog back toward the sea. Somewhere across that quiet water, two walls of earth that were built to hold now hold a grief they were never asked to imagine. As the clouds that will rain on Derna spin up untelevised, noiseless as the second hand of a clock, morning makes everything visible and nothing easier. The wreck is somewhere out there where the water darkens from green to blue. The boy is now a young man with a rough shave, a police shoot t-shirt, and a gaze that has adopted the horizon as its only permissible address. The morgue's white van rattles by and someone calls out a name that no one answers to. Mara and the stringer stand with two cameras and a microphone that might as well be a teaspoon against the flood. She thinks of other mornings when the disaster never snapped into one frame, when the story was a temperature reading and the plot was a slow climb. In Karachi, a man had opened his flat to let the cool night run through, and the heat came in instead. An invisible animal that lay on the couch, climbed into the bed, curled itself around an infant's neck and did not let go. A paramedic had wiped her forehead and said, "It is always the same, the old, the poor, the alone. We call them the quiet deaths." No cameras then. The fans spun, the power cut out. The daily numbers reported as excess on page A10, if at all. The term heat dome had floated into the vernacular somewhere far away after the Pacific Northwest learned you can cook inside your own house. In Europe in 2003, statisticians would later calculate tens of thousands of additional deaths. The cameras had shown fountains and sunburns and an old woman holding a fan the way you hold a talisman. She remembers a graphic designer struggling to make heat visible, a thermometer. He said, knowing it was wrong, red map. She had laughed, not unkindly, because how do you ask an audience to be moved by a contour map? She thinks of the phrase silent killer, which is useful because it is true and useless because it is inert on a screen. There was a famine, officially, in Somalia in 2011, and the declaration itself was a hampered form of speech. When enough people have already died, we are permitted to use the word. She had stood in a clinic where a nurse pressed the skin of a child's forearm and watched the indentation remain. A simple test for edema that required no equipment, no graphics, only eyes. The attention that came with that word did not arrive like rain in time. It arrived like whether you're trying to outrun, always catching up to where you were last week. In Yemen, she had received drone footage from an aid group, beautiful in the way drone footage can't help but be of a line of people, like threads through a place that had been unspooling for so long that it was no longer a news event, it was a condition. She had written a script with sentences like, "The UN warns of famine in parts of Yemen," and felt the language bounce off the armor that audiences grow to survive the 20th iteration of the same plea. Back in Greece, the parade of white vans continues. The Coast Guard releases a statement. It contains the word tragedy, and also complex, and our deepest sympathies. A crowd chants something that Mara doesn't understand. A Greek journalist translates. They are saying murderer, but it sounds in the air less like an accusation and more like grief going through its phases in public. Questioning, anger, the need for a face to place at the edge of a sentence that begins, "Why did..." By noon, the oxygen clock is at 47 hours. A panel argues about whether the 5 men in the sub can be rescued by a robotic arm. The split screen shows a graphic of the Titanic's hull like a sleeping whale and a sliver of a dock in Greece where someone is writing names on a wet clipboard. Mara keeps filming. The stringer moves like he has learned to make himself small, so that he is always where someone might speak. A man in a green shirt says he sent all 3 of his sons because he saw no life left in the village he is supposed to be the center of. This sea was supposed to be like the bus, he says through a translator. You get on, you get off, you go to work. Behind him the sea is perfectly indifferent. That night, under a light the color of hospital tiles, 2 officials whisper angrily at each other and then, in an act of theater that feels both rehearsed and panicked, invite the press into a room and say it was not as it seems, that they did what they could. They produced a photo that shows a line being tossed to the ship and argued that this proves aid. The survivors say the opposite. The story becomes a duel of angles. Mara sleeps 3 hours on the hotel bed with her shoes on. She dreams of a street she used to know flooding in slow motion, the water climbing stairs and rounding corners with the deliberation of someone counting. She wakes to another meteorologist's message. A storm named Daniel, which looks nothing like the name suggests, is rolling over the Mediterranean, which looks as placid as a postcard until the winds begin. Rare, the message says, but less rare every year. The map shows a spiral that is headed for the northeast coast of Libya, landing on a city she has barely seen in headlines since a war that turned it into a cautionary noun. She answers the message. We'll watch. She writes, as if watching were something more than a stance. The plane for New York rumbles low overhead. She imagines her colleagues' eyes soar, still in the glare of the oxygen clock. She imagines the interns tasked with finding experts on hull integrity and the bookers calling a former Navy diver whose Wikipedia page is now trending. She imagines a bar in Midtown where someone says they've got a live shot from the Coast Guard hangar at 3 a.m. It's going to be huge. to a nodding friend who says, "I know a guy at a submersible company." The next day, back in the newsroom, she is told that the Greek segment did well, a mercantile phrase that lands in her as both relief and insult. The chief says, "We'll keep on it if the numbers go up," and means the dead, and also the viewers. The oxygen clock is at 12 hours. A crawler at the bottom of the screen whispers that Pakistan is bracing for another monsoon, that cholera is spreading in camps, that Mozambique is, as ever, in the path of the thing that refuses to be called a crisis because it is permanent. The oxygen clock hits zero in an instant that is both staged and without ceremony. The Coast Guard announces wreckage found. The 5 men are declared lost. The clock disappears. The panel shifts to protocols and legalities in grief for men with names that are easy to pronounce. The audience applauds the rescue crews and mourns the men with bios. The segment ends with music designed to be reflective without insisting. A commercial for life insurance comes on and a mother kisses a toddler under soft light while a voice assures peace of mind. In Greece, the funerals have not yet begun because there are no bodies to accompany such a word. In New York, the meeting starts the way meetings start, with a sip and a click and the hum that rolls through when everyone is about to decide what matters tomorrow. The meteorologist clears her throat. "Libya," she says, and puts a map up. "Old damned storm that'll sit in rain. A city called Derna in the path." Someone says, "Access." Someone else says, "Westerners." A third says, "Live. Can we get live?" The meteorologist says, "It will be night." The chief says, "Let's see." Mara thinks of the boy with the polite hand. She thinks of Pakistan's floodplain drawn as a living room that tends to arrange itself around the river until the river decides to rearrange them instead. She thinks of a heatwave and the sound of a fan that never once made it onto the news except as a background hum. She thinks of Derna, a map dot, a dam built in another era under another flag, a city that does not yet know that the night is about to drag the river through its streets with the force of a history that no one here will be awake to narrate. Her phone vibrates with a different kind of message. A friend from an aid group texts, "If this storm hits, it's going to be bad, but we won't be able to get anyone in 4 days. Please cover it anyway." She writes back the only word she can muster that will not make a promise she cannot keep. Trying. Outside, thunder confesses itself late. The newsroom's windows do not open. The air smells like carpet. The lightning shifts in the reflection of the glass. Somewhere a siren rises and then falls. Not here, not yet. The storm flings itself at the Libyan coastline like a gesture that cannot be taken back. Rain thickens from description to element, from analogy to act. In Derna, night closes over the city and stays. The power fails with the familiar finality of a switch being flipped in a room you no longer own. The riverbed, which has been part of the city's anatomy since anyone can remember, begins to mutter. People go to bed with the kind of worry that has not yet earned panic. A father secures the shutters. A mother moves a mat away from the window. The city exhales into dark. At 2 dams uphill, the pressure mounts in a slow, relentless conversation with concrete and earth. They were built in the 1970s, under a government that wrote its own future in bold and in blood. They have been maintained in the way of so many aging things that live under sanction and distraction and the thin scrape of second-hand parts. The rain speaks in a single tense, present. In the newsroom, Mara and the meteorologist watch a satellite loop that looks like a bruise spreading. The radar colors go from gentle green to ravenous red. The storm's name sits in the corner of the screen as if a name could domesticate it. The chief asks, "Any pictures?" The answer is no. Any love? No. Any Westerners? Not that we know of. The meeting adjourns with a shrug that is not cruel, just busy. At dawn, a silence that is not silence but the absence of the expected birds on motorbikes. Voices settles over Derna. Then the dam goes. Not in a cinematic crescendo, not in an explosion that announces itself. Rather, the earthen wall surrenders in a series of collapses that become one. The water that has been disciplined for decades breaks its oath and roars down what was the riverbed and is now a path with houses and cafes and a store where a boy bought a loaf of bread the afternoon before. By the time anyone picks up a phone to film, the torrent has already taken its first 100 stories and thrown them where stories go when they are too large to tell at once. The first citizen videos that reach Mara are a stutter of blue and black. When dawn arrives and the cameras can see, they show streets planed clean. The river swollen to a brown wall that smashes into a concrete bridge and carries it whole. Doors flapping like tongues. She watches a man swing onto a rooftop and pull a child up by one arm. He looks at the camera and his mouth forms a word that might be thanks or might be a name. She thinks, who will say his name? The numbers trickle, then surge, hundreds missing, then thousands. The press releases from authorities are stiff and delayed, the command structures fractured by years of conflict. The coordination that disasters require scrambled by the fact that disaster is also the political condition. The algorithm notices a minor celebrity shares a clip from a Libyan cameraman and writes, "Pray for Libya," and the clip burrows into feeds between jokes and the sub-story's last thoughtful full stop. Mara texts the stringer from Greece, who has a cousin who knows a fixer in Tunis, who knows a Libyan journalist who can meet at the border if they can get visas that may or may not exist. Meanwhile, the aid group friend writes, "The bridge is gone. The roads are mud. We're trying to get boats in." Meanwhile, the meteorologist says, "This is what warmer water does," and sends a graph. Meanwhile, the chief says, "We can do a segment at the top of the second block," and the words mean, "We will not ignore it." They also mean, "Do not lead." She pushes, "We should go," she says, and the chief says, "What do you have?" She points to the videos, to the numbers, to the history of a city that was already a knot in Libya's rope of factions and flags. She says, "We can tell it through a family, through a dam builder, through the local radio announcer who stayed on the air." She says anything that makes it seem manageable, human, shaped. The budget, battered by a year of too many emergencies that did not align with sponsor seasons, resists. Flights are booked to Tunis anyway. The gear is pared down to essentials and then pared down again. No satellite truck. 2 small cameras. Batteries like bread. The fixer has a brother who can drive at night, but not through certain zones, but maybe through others. If this malicious checkpoint is manned by that man who remembers him from school. On the plane, the cabin lights dim to a polite dusk. The passengers slip into the anonymity that is required for long travel. The scented neck pillow that makes you look both ridiculous and safe. The thin gray blanket with the airline's logo like a watermark of a place you cannot pronounce. Mara tries to sleep, fails, opens her laptop and watches the videos loop. The bridge, the brown wall, the man pulling the child up onto the roof. She writes a script full of verbs that are not good enough. Swept, pounded, erased. She deletes them. She writes names in a column. Most of the names are blanks. Tunisia smells like dust and cumin and exhaust. At the border, a soldier with eyebrows like punctuation marks flips through their passports and says, "Media," as if it is a question about their character. The fixer speaks quickly, adverbs piling up, and the soldier sighs and stamps and waves them into a country within a country. An area where the phone signals change and the children watch strangers pass with a keen bored attention that says this is not new. This procession of people coming for bad reasons. Derna reveals its wound slowly. From a hill, the city appears as a pale shell cracked in the middle by a bar of darker earth. On the approach, the smell arrives before the particulars. Brine and rotten gasoline and that metallic temps that is not blood but insists. The bridge used to cut a perfect posture under the sky. Now a perfect absence. The river is not a river. It is a gouge. On its sides, houses that had begun the week as nouns are now adjectives, flattened, twisted, opened. A car sits in a third-floor window like a joke a god told badly. The first man they speak to is a teacher. He says, "My students think the river is a friend," in a thin voice that keeps tripping over the present tense. He points to where the cafe used to be. He points to where he thinks his sister's house might have been. He says, "At 3 a.m. there was a sound like every door in the world opening at once." He rubs his eyes and the gesture is less theatrical than biological. A body trying to see what it cannot. Mara films what he points at, then films his eyes, then lowers the camera because the eyes do not consent to the kind of intimacy that cameras take. A woman with a microphone from an Arabic station squeezes past with her cameraman, who is also her husband, who is also the father of their child, who is back in Egypt with his mother. The woman nods at Mara, a nod that is both greeting and benediction and mourning. They are all here on one permit, making this scene. There is a municipal official who is both exhausted and on the brink of performance. He stands on a truck bed and speaks through a bullhorn. "We need body bags," he says. "We need gloves. We need doctors." A man below him holds up a plastic bag with a shoe in it. He says, "I need a foot for this shoe," and the crowd laughs because the sentence is too awful not to exhale. The camera plates, the city with images, a refrigerator in a tree, a boat in a living room, a photograph of a woman and a child nailed by a shard of glass to a wall that has no reason left to stand. The drone shots begin to appear from aid groups that can fly. They are beautiful. They are obscene. They are necessary. As night draws a line across the sky, the generators stammer. The headlamps of cars bob like the eyes of nervous animals. Men in neon vests pour the mud with shovels, and the sucking sound the mud makes seems like an attempt at speech. The fixer speaks to a man in a uniform that is just a different color of civilian. The man says, "You can film but not there," pointing toward a building that houses something that belongs to a faction with a name that will not air well. He says, "And not the anger," and the word contains a warning that is not about their safety. Later, on the phone to New York, the chief is caffeinated and clockless. "How bad?" he asks. "Bad," she says. He says, "Numbers," and she offers the ones she has and the impossible vastness of what she can't count. "We have the sub-follow, we have the political thing in DC, and now this. We can do 5 minutes at the top." She breathes out. "It is more than a minute. It is less than everything." She says, "Let me send you the teacher. Let me send you the river." She doesn't say, "Let me send you the smell." At midnight, the local radio station is broadcasting on backup power. A man is reading names. He reads them slowly. He repeats them. The room is hot and smells like old wires. A small fan is pushing air in the way. A person with poor upper body strength pushes a stalled car. The radio waves go out into the dark city like a gentle net. Mara sits on the floor and leans her head against the wall and thinks of the newsroom's bright hum. The oxygen clock that demanded attention and got it. The Greek harbor where names are still being mispronounced and then corrected. She thinks of a theory she wrote about in her 20s, how media follows certain rules that no one wrote down but everyone enforces. We like drama that fits within a day. We like victims who resemble our imagined viewer. We like numbers that are large but not incomprehensible. We love sound we can play on loop. We love someone to blame. She thinks of Derna, which follows no rule but gravity. Outside, the sea breathes in and out as if it has been doing any other thing forever. Morning is a scraped knee. The city wakes to what it cannot sleep through. The teacher returns to the river with a shovel and a mask. He is joined by a boy who is old enough to lift but too young to know what he will see. Together they work one small rectangle of mud, and in that rectangle they find a plate, a shoe, a spoon, a glove. The boy holds up the spoon like it is evidence of a civilization. The teacher says, "It is," and the boy keeps digging. The rescue crews have multiplied, thrown across time zones by the physics of compassion and bureaucracy. A Moroccan team works beside a Tunisian team, beside a Turkish team. Their vests brand them as if saving lives were an event sponsored by nation states. A man from an Italian unit stands in the shade of a truck and sips water, and he looks up at the drone that is filming him and he arranges his face. It is not vanity, it is survival. To control anything in this scene, Mara and the crew follow a group to a house that is now an open page. A woman lifts a curtain that hangs from nothing and steps through the space where she used to step, because muscle memory is cruelly true. She is looking for a box where she kept photographs. She finds nothing. She turns to the camera and says, in Arabic, a sentence that rolls slowly, with the weight of a lullaby, "Please tell them we are here." The translator renders it exactly as it is. At the hospital, nurses write on the backs of their hands, "The morgue is full, the corridor is full." A woman sobs in a way that seems to have no lungs, only throat. She spreads her fingers and lifts her face, and someone ushers the camera away with a gentleness that carries the force of a push. Outside, on the steps, a young man repeats the story of last night as if repetition might soften it into myth. "The river moved," he says, incredulous, pointing to the sky. The river moved. They cut a piece for the evening news that holds nothing superfluous. There are no adjectives that are not strictly necessary. The line that the anchor will read is, "In Libya, thousands are missing after 2 dams collapsed under intense rains, sweeping a city into the sea. Our team is on the ground." They include the teacher, the woman's appeal, the drone's hush. They include the radio man with the names. They include a line about neglected infrastructure, climate change's thumb on the scale of storms, the caution that numbers are provisional. They try to put the words responsibility and history in the same sentence without being scolded in the earpiece. They keep in a shot of a boy holding a spoon. The segment airs at the top. The chief fought for it. The oxygen clock is gone now. The sub has been declared, discovered, and lost. A week has shrunk it into a case study about risk and a think piece about extremes. The Greek segment has dwindled to legal disputes and EU admonishments and a second-day headline that is now a fourth-day headline. Questions mount. Tonight, Libya fills the screen. The drone pulls back from the river to reveal what cannot be metabolized in one sitting. The anchor says the name of the city, carefully. The responses arrive with the small human joy bursts that keep this work from calcifying us. A message from a viewer in Ohio. "I had not heard about this. Thank you." A note from an aid worker. "Your piece helped unlock a donor. We can get more pumps." A text from the stringer in Greece. "They came again today to ask names. We still say them." The chief says, "The numbers were good," and she says, "Good," and they both mean both things. But attention is a tide with its own gravity. In 2 days, a vote in a parliament somewhere will take over the top block. In a week, a celebrity will do something that will be called a scandal and will eat 3 segments that could have been used to tell you one more. Name from a radio in Derna. In 2 weeks, the algorithm will forget to serve you Libya unless you trick it with a search. The newsroom will keep humming. Mara will keep pushing. She knows now that this is the loop. You win a minute here, 5 there. You put a word into a living room that would never have held it. You are useful briefly. You are replaced by the present tense of somewhere else. She calls the meteorologist and asks to come back to the map. They stand again in front of the spiral that shows the world as it is. Warmer, wetter, angrier in quiet ways. They talk about old dams and old decisions and new rain. They talk about floodplains and zoning and the sentences that show up in reports, the passive voice of lessons learned that never names who will learn them. They record a segment about the infrastructure that waits for failure. They record another about the spring that will bring the next rarer but less rare storm. They include Karachi heat and the silence of fans. They include Karachi, Portland, Paris, Karachi again. They add the Pakistani farmer's hands, the way they demarcated land, the way his arms drew the line the river laughed at. They end the Libya piece with the radio man. He is still reading names. He repeats them because repetition is a form of hope. He says one, then another, separated by breath. The camera lingers. The producer in the control room holds for a beat longer than the rundown allows. We learn how to name things by hearing them named. What gets media attention is not an accident. She knows it is the arithmetic of proximity and spectacle in the stories we have told for so long we think they are laws. It is also access. Can't we get there and risk will we be allowed? And habit does a new template exist. Disasters that explode into the day with sirens fit a channel. Disasters that creep, that suffocate, that starve, are an affront to that appetite. We can change some of that. We can build new appetite. We can slow our breath. We can invest in local reporters whose feet are already on the ground, whose phones do not need to roam. We can create graphics that make heat feel like a thing you would fear. We can resist the clock and insist on the long arc. We can insist that a boy in a port in Greece and a child on a roof in Derna and a farmer on a mud island in the Indus are the main story, not the sidebar. After Derna she goes back to Greece, to the harbor that still smells like brine and burnt coffee. The boy with the polite hand has left for a camp whose name is a number. The woman with the grey scarf, who brought water in a paper cup that first morning, has a notebook now with names in it and phone numbers, and she is doing a job better than any machine. You told the story, she tells Mara. Tell it again. Mara nods, because that is the only vow that can be kept. She flies home. The city under the plane winks in rectangles. The monitors in the newsroom blink awake. Someone says, earthquake in Morocco, and another says, fire in Maui, and another says, drought warning, and another says, a boat in the channel, and the hum returns. The electric prelude to choices. She sits, opens her notebook to the page where she keeps a crooked list of rituals. At the top, she has written in stubborn ink, go where the cameras are not, stay when the cameras leave, ask names, learn to say them, call back, count the quiet, count the heat, count the miles a woman must walk for water, count the hours after the spotlight turns off, count the number of times the same person had to say the same sentence to be believed. She adds a line, leave room for the smell of rain. There is a danger in making yourself into an instrument for other people's grief. There is a danger in believing that if you told it right, a dam wouldn't fail, a boat wouldn't sink, the air wouldn't cook an old woman in her own kitchen. There is a relief in admitting that all you can do is witness, and choose the witnessing with care, and with more courage than convenience. The Ohio viewer writes again, what else am I missing? The message arrives as she is filming a map. She writes back a list of names, not places. The radio man in Derna, the teacher with the shovel, the woman with the empty curtain doorway, the boy who practiced raising his polite hand until it became a habit his body forgot to break. She writes, look for them when their names are not trending. Late that night, rain taps the city's windows. A siren floats and fades. On a low frequency that most speakers cannot capture, the world groans a little, old dams talking to new storms. In a square of light somewhere, a man reads names into a microphone with a faith that has nothing to do with whether a camera is in the room. It fills the air, it fills the silence. If stories like this move you, subscribe for more true events that changed the world.